Hello ladies and gentlemen, this is Blue Maxima. Welcome back to Blue Boards. This time we're going to be taking a look at Millennium Blades by D. Brad Talton Jr., Fabio Fontes, and Level 99 Games. Although you might have noticed that this isn't actually my physical copy because there's nothing in the box. With that said, you want to see my actual physical copy? Yep, here it is. I own the entire thing. All the expansions and all of the mini expansions. I'm missing one card, which is currently in the mail. Unfortunately for me, I haven't actually had the opportunity to play this physical version of the game because my board game meetup just hasn't had the time for it, because the game is quite long and we simply haven't been able to fit it in, which is unfortunate. It is also worth noting that I have actually tried to do a physical video of Millennium Blades twice now, and it's come out horribly both times. So we're going to be relying on some tabletop simulator footage, and I do apologize for this. I don't like doing this, but the other videos turned out to be 50 minutes long and completely unwatchable. So just please forgive me for that. I just want to actually have a good video for you guys and not something that's that long and that unwatchable. So, what is Millennium Blades? It is a game about playing card games. You go into two different kinds of phases. A deck building phase, where you buy, sell, trade, and collect cards. And then you have a tournament, in which you play the cards that are in your deck, play against all your opponents, and whoever has the most points comes out on top at the end. You do 3 deck building phases, each of which is followed by a tournament phase, and after that, that's the end of the game. Person with the most victory points wins. And it really is quite a simple game to understand, but it's when the cards come in that makes things interesting. With that said, we're going to talk about the tournament first, because it's easier to understand the game if you go through the tournament first. So the tournament has a tableau of 6 cards that go from left to right, and that's where you play the cards from your deck. You are also allowed to bring along a deck box, which usually gives you either an end game scoring effect or a singular action for you to do, usually the former. And then you'll have accessories, which will let you do one-time actions, which will generally help you or not help your opponents. And so the entire idea of the tournament is you play a card during your turn. You have to. And then you can choose whether or not you want to do an action before or after you play the card. It's a relatively simple system to understand, and the cards in question are pretty simple in that regard, because they have some very simple effects, whether it be activate the effect when it goes down, activate the event at all times because this effect is ongoing. When this card gets flipped over, you activate the effect. When this card is the rightmost face-up card, you activate this effect. When you want to do an action, flip this card over and do that action. It's all relatively simple stuff like that. There's also a couple of extra rules on the side, like how cards can clash, in which you draw cards from the store deck in order to add power to your card, and everybody does that for each one of their rightmost face-up cards, and the winner is the person with the highest number total. And face-down cards basically don't exist. They have no element, type, star level, or effect. It's basically just simple rules like that, right? But the genius of the game comes with the cards themselves, because the cards themselves absolutely love to break the rules of the game. Doing things like adding tableau slots or taking them away, using stuff from the aftermarket or from people's binders, using the ability to reposition cards to completely change up the order of play and therefore potentially break or create a new combo, whether it be stealing cards from people's hands or even just doing things like creating massive chain effects that can completely change the board. And the first thing I can think of is a card called Dr. Balance, which is included in all copies of Millennium Blades, in which whenever anyone flips over a card, they choose a player and that person flips over a card. But that effect keeps going on because it's applied to every card. So there's a flip going back and forth, which can absolutely disrupt a ton of different strategies. There is so much going on in Millennium Blades as a result of all these effects, and it can be helped by the fact that you take along 8 cards to a tournament to fill in your 6 slots. So you've got room for a bit of extra breathing room, and as a result, you do need to have like 2 plans, preferably 3, preferably 4, because the other players are going to take the opportunity to flip your cards if they can. They're going to take the opportunity to prevent you from scoring if they can. And they're going to do a bunch of other stuff along the way. So you need to have a bunch of things planned. You need to have some protection, whether that be via other cards in your deck or your accessories. And you need to have a couple of extra plans ready to pivot to if things go wrong, because it's that kind of game. It's really easy to find yourself in a bad situation just because you didn't have just one little bit of protection. As a result, with all of the different cards that the game has, because the game technically has over 1,000 unique cards in it that all have their own special effects and abilities, the tournaments never play out the same way twice because of the way the deck building phases work, where everyone ends up with a completely different set of cards every single time. And it's given just one last little sprinkle of neatness via the no takebacks rule. Because a lot of board games, or at least a lot of board game players, will let you do takebacks. They'll let you do things you forgot to do, or let you take back a card play because you made a mistake. In this game, it's very much required that you don't let people do that, because it's meant to emulate a trading card game. If you make a bad play, you have to live with it. And it is such a cool little thing. It's thematic as hell, and it adds to the mechanical complexity of the game, and I love it. But of course, this means we have to go on to the deck building phase. The deck building phase takes place in 3 basically sub-phases. At the very beginning of it, you get $30, which is a lot of money. And in the physical game, you get these fantastic little paper wads that are 10 pieces of paper stuck together with a sticker, and you can just throw them down to buy cards. And it's meant to like emulate the amount of money people spend on these bloody trading card games, right? So you get a lot of this money, and you can buy cards from the store, which is the 9 cards laid out in front of you that shows off a bunch of the same set. And, not same set, different sets, but you can also buy from the top of the core deck, which is a series of cards that are just generally useful, mainly focused around deck boxes and accessories, but they have their own powerful cards in there, which are worth digging for if you've got the money and ability to do it. But of course, you've also got the ability to use your limited sell markers to put cards in the aftermarket and take the value in their star value, and then someone else can buy from the aftermarket, giving you your sell marker back, but you can't buy your own cards in the aftermarket. Makes sense to me. Prevents you from just using it as a temporary bank, right? Of course, you can also trade with other players, and you should always be trading with other players, because they've probably got something you want, you've probably got something they want, and you should always be passing cards back and forth. Technically, there's a rule that says trades need to be equal, but it's very hard to determine what's actually equal in this game, so you basically need to just use the free trade rule all the time, which is you can trade whatever you want for whatever you want, more or less. And you've also got the ability to make a collection, which is several cards with the same element or type, which is the icons on the left, but different star values, in order to earn yourself some victory points at the end of the deck building phase. You've also got NPCs, which you can throw away cards for in order to get, and they're worth extra victory points at the end of the game as well. You've also got the metagame cards, the first of which is revealed at the beginning of deck building, which will show you an element or a type or a rarity or a star value that will get you some bonus points if you manage to have it in your tableau at the end of the tournament. Then, during the second deck building phase, not only will you get a few more cards like you did at the beginning of the deck building phase, but you'll also get to see the second metagame card, which will give you a bonus for those 4 things that I just mentioned, giving you some potential ways to take your deck building. And then there's a third deck building phase, which is no one can sell cards anymore, you don't get any more cards, and you don't get any more money. It's basically a final grace period to get your deck together, get your collection together, and be ready for the fight. The one thing that makes this absolutely brain-burningly perfect is the fact that deck building is timed. The first phase is 7 minutes, the second phase is 7 minutes, and then the third phase is 6 minutes. Now, 20 minutes might sound like a lot of time, but you're trying to build a deck. You're trying to see what these effects are and how they work together with each other. You're trying to buy and sell cards from the store, trade with other people, make your collection work, get some NPCs going on. And you have to do this all at the same time. Now, the game's not an absolute bastard about it. You are allowed to say, all right, everybody, cards down, in order to explain a rule, which is entirely fair. But this is just genius in the sense that it's going to make you make mistakes. You're going to be in a rush. You're going to end up with an imperfect deck because you focus too much on the economy side of things, or vice versa. And it's going to come back to haunt you. You need to be on the ball and you need to be fast. And I'm telling you, man, it's so cool. Trying to work through all these as fast as you can is some of the most brain-burning stuff I have done in such a long damn time, and I love it. It is so engaging and so satisfying at the end of the 20 minutes when you've got your deck together, you take it to the tournament, and it just wins. There are some other elements of genius as well. The core deck is the same every time, and it's always got the same staples, which means it's always got that little bit of consistency. But the store deck is made up of a bunch of different sets of cards from within the game, because there's over 50 or 60 sets in the game in total once you've got all the expansions. And you put in 6 green sets, 5 blue sets, and 4 red sets at the setup of the game. And these sets are all focused around one thing, whether it be fast, which is focused around speed play, which is putting as many cards down as possible in one turn, and then bringing out the deck's monster boss, which is deck hard, which will flip over all the cards you played, make everyone else flip over a bunch of cards, and give you an absolute ton of points for it. Or Star Power, which is focused around getting as many +1 tokens on the field as possible and scoring off of them at the end of the game. There are so many sets with all of these different kinds of strategies, whether they be something specific like fast, or whether they be something along the lines of being more generic but being more helpful in more decks. And the result is, when you swap one of these sets out and swap in another set, even if the 14 in there remain the same, it changes the balance of the game. It changes how everything works. It changes just, oh man, it's so cool because it creates its own meta every game that you play. So you end up having to look at all these cards in an entirely new light once you've got your hands on your new cards that you're going to get, and you've started buying cards from all the sets. And there's so many different kinds of cards as well. There's less rare ones, which will turn up multiple times, but then you've got boss monsters of decks that have incredibly powerful effects. And this is also helped out by the promos, in which during the deck building phase, you can throw away 5, 7, or 9 cards in order to get these incredibly overpowered cards with really strong effects that can just wipe the floor with anyone if you've got the right strategy for them. Some of them might appear useless, but then you might end up finding the 2 cards that work together for a really cool strategy, and you'll find yourself using it just because it's such a cool idea. Like, everyone was always going on about how the Dice Throne crossover set wasn't very good. But then when I got my hands on the Samurai card, I also had an accessory called the Dark Tub, which causes all of my face down cards to show up as Dark type. And the Samurai's ability is, I believe it was 4 cards in your tableau that all share the same element, you get 40 points. So I did that. And one of the players who apparently had been playing Millennium Blades for a fair bit longer than I had said something along the lines of, "That's the best use of Dark Tub that I've ever seen." And it's always satisfying to have these sorts of combinations. And when, even in the base set of Millennium Blades, where you only get like 8, 7, and 6, green, blue, and red, that still means you can still swap out a couple of sets and still change up the meta of the game completely and figure out what works and what doesn't. Not to mention the gold, silver, and bronze promo sets, of which there's a few of each. So you've always got something new to work with. Not to mention that, well, 1 card from a promo set gets dealt out to every player at the end of a tournament, giving you just a little bit more to work with. There's so much more to love about Millennium Blades. That's not the card play, that's not the crazy amounts of effects, the satisfaction of getting a really cool deck wrapped up within that 20-minute time limit. There's just the theme of it. The art is fantastic. The main cover of Millennium Blades is what drew me in the first place, because you see that cover, and if you're like me and you have a history of playing Playground Yu-Gi-Oh! And watching the cartoons back in the day, seeing the two main characters basically look like Yu-Gi-Oh! Stun doubles with really cool designs, cards being played like it's the end of the world if these cards don't get played, and just some really nice art alongside it. It just all looks... It's just all so good. Right down to the backs of the cards looking like booster packs. They look fantastic. When you just look at them off angle when you're actually playing a physical copy of this, you can swear they're booster packs, and just picking them up and flipping them over, giving you that little drive of satisfaction from opening a booster pack and getting that one really rare card. It's so good. It's such a good thing. And all of the art outside of the crossovers was done by one guy, Fabio Fontes, so all the art is consistent across the entire game and all of the expansions. And I really like the look of all this art and all of these parodies of real-world things. Whether it be like Fast, which is clearly meant to be a rip on not only the Fast and the Furious series, but movies like Terminator as well. And then there's ones they'll rip off everything from Power Rangers to Master Chief to Pokemon to a bunch of references I don't even understand. Because this game is just so packed full of them that it's just impossible to not see a couple of references and just get a big smile on your face. It is so much fun just sorting out this game when you first unpack it, looking at all these different references and just getting this big grin, and then getting them in the middle of the game and wondering, okay, how can I use this? How can I make this work? With that said, I have heard a lot of people call the art for this game quote unquote crap. So I'm not going to claim to say for sure that this game looks amazing, but damn it, it looks amazing to me. There's also a ton of expansions that add a bunch of stuff. So you've got two big expansions. The second one you can't get right now, but Level 99 have promised that they're actually going to be reprinting the entire line, although Collusion, which is the big box you saw at the beginning of this video, is probably not going to be that big box. It's just going to be a regular box with a bunch of cards in it for the most part, which is fine. And they add things. They add new sets for the store deck, which is fantastic. They add new cards for the core deck, which is fantastic. They add a bunch of stuff that I haven't talked about yet, which is fantastic. And again, I can't find a reason to tell you not to buy the expansions if you like the game, because it just gives you more stuff to do. And of course, it's a level 99 game, and I've learned that level 99, along with being over the top with their presentation to the point where you have wads you have to put together that are just pieces of paper with a sticker around them, they also have a ton of variants, and some of these are really bloody cool. You've got some of the simple ones, like you've got Sealed Play, which instead of starting with the starter decks, which give you a slight base to work from, actually give you a ton of cards from both decks so that the decks actually can be way out there from the very beginning, which helps keep things interesting. There's also Funky Mode, which is ridiculous. You play one deck building phase in which you get 3 times the cards that you normally would. And when that happens, you end up having to build 3 decks in which you will take into 3 separate tournaments, 1 each, which is nutty, and I'm looking forward to trying it out, but man, if it seems like a pain in the neck. There's also venues, which actually, when you flip them up, they reveal just other crazy things that you can do. Other like little conditions you have to live by to just keep the game that little bit more varied. And the couple of times I've managed to play with them have been fun, although I gotta tell you, man, some of them are absolutely crazy and completely change the way some of the cards work, which, to be fair, in this game, anything to keep the meta fresh is always a good thing. You've also got the ability to play cooperative with solo bosses. They have a deck box which gives them points depending on how many players they are, so you basically have to beat that. Then they have a bunch of accessories which can completely change up the way that the game plays, and you have to try and figure out ways around those accessories. And then they have a deck of 8 cards, which is incredibly powerful, and you're just flipping a random card off the top of that deck every time, but you're allowed to go through it to see what might potentially be coming up, so you can plan around it. And it makes things very difficult. And also, instead of playing the free-for-all mode, you can play on teams, where everyone gets their own little unique powers, and you need to just work as a team of 2 people to beat everyone else around the table. But you've also got the ability to play as a solo player in a team match, which lets you draw one of the characters, which I haven't talked about yet, because the characters are arguably one of the coolest things about this game. So the characters are just basically extra powers, and these extra powers are absolutely insane. It depends on the character, of course, but everyone gets a power in the deck building phase and everyone gets a power in the tournament phase. There are some relatively simple ones, like Fulton Suitcase, who has $45 at the beginning of the deck building phase, and he has the opportunity to look at cards that are face down for $1. Okay, fair enough. He also has the ability to spend $1 in order to put down a +1 token onto a card on his field. So basically, he's just money bags. But then you get to... He's actually really useful. That actually kind of breaks the game a little bit because of the amount of cards he can get. But then you get to people who are absolutely insane, like Pritchard Leftfield. Yes, a pun on Richard Garfield, who has the ability at the deck building phase to, instead of drawing 3 cards from each deck, he gets to take a set from inside the box and bring it into the game, completely changing up the meta of what's there already. And then during the tournament phase, he just gets to take a card back into his hand and use it again. Like, what the hell? And then you've got someone else who's got the ability to merge 2 cards together and play them simultaneously as a double card with 2 abilities, a massive star total, and everything about that. Then you've got someone else who's got the ability to actively steal cards from people's collections at the end of deck building and then swap cards around in his tableau during the actual game. Then you've got someone else who can completely block the effects of certain cards. And they're all nuts. Every one of them breaks the game wide open, but at the same time, every one of them is so broken that they're not broken. They're all just got their own little advantages, and anyone who takes advantage of these advantages can win the game, as long as they take advantage of these advantages better than anyone else takes better advantage of those advantages. They also come with a couple of other neat things, like how if you win a tournament, you have to give out 1 copy of your promo card to everybody. And it's usually like a copy of one of your powers, whether it be getting extra cards, getting rid of cards from your tableau, doing some other sort of crazy crap. And even then, if you can't make use of that card, just sell it for $9 because it's got 9 stars on it and it'll be useful to get you some more cards later on. There's also another thing that you get as well, which is friendship. And friendship lets you... It's basically more trade bait, where if you've got no other leverage, you can just freely give people victory points. Because the cards don't give you victory points while you have them, but they will while someone else has them. So it's always interesting to have just a little bit more trade bait. And as a result, once you understand the rules of the game, you'll never play without characters again. They are technically a variant, but basically, yeah, they're part of the game. Their powers are ridiculous, and they are so much fun to pull off. Like, my favorite is the Pressmaster, who has the ability to use cards from the aftermarket. So cards that people have turned face up in terms of clashes. He can just use a cell marker to play that on his own tableau. So he's a little bit random, but he's so fun where you can get a good combo off, and he gets more cards in every deck building phase than everyone else does. So he's always got a ton of flexibility. But then again, there are 23 other characters, each of which with their own stupid, over-the-top abilities, and you just can't help but love and appreciate just how crazy they are. And the best thing, well, not the best thing, but one of the cooler things about it is that if you're playing co-op, they have an entirely different set of powers that help out their entire team instead. So Pressmaster hands out more cards to everybody when he starts his deck building phase. Pritchard hands out cards to everybody at the start of his deck building phase. And all of these things work with all of these players. So you can end up with more money, more cards, and a ton of extra abilities to use. But of course, the boss gets an absolutely massive amount of points at the beginning of the game, and you really need to be working your decks in order to make that win. Now, there are some downsides to Millennium Blades, of course. It's one of the longest games I've ever played. It says on the box that it is 2 hours, and that is laugh-worthy, because I have never had a game of this go less time as a full game than 3 hours, because figuring out all of these effects, stopping to ask for rules clarifications, and everything in between can cause the game to become very long very quickly. So if you're strapped for time, I would recommend using stopwatches. Otherwise, this might be as long as a 3-player game of Twilight Imperium. The footage of gameplay you're seeing in the background went for 4 hours. Just to give you an idea, with 4 people. It can go for longer if you've got more than that, man. Good lord. It's also hard to set up physically. On Tabletop Simulator, it's pretty simple because you can just take, like, the sets out of the bags and then put them all together and press R to shuffle them. But in real life, it means that you have to take all of these decks and shuffle them all together in this, like, 10-minute shuffling spree, unless you prepare it ahead of time, and then you get to sort all the cards back out into their individual sets. Unless, of course, you play, like, 3 or 4 games of it in a row with the same meta in order to, like, you know, get used to it, and then swap it out for a new store deck later on. That is entirely possible, but it is just worth noting. It is also, of course, one of the most hardcore games I've played because it is stressful as hell trying to get all of these things in your head at once. Whether it be, you know, collecting cards, buying and selling, making your collection, all over this timed course. It can be very difficult. And if you're even remotely slow, in the sense that you just can't keep up with this sort of thing, you're probably going to hate this. It is also worth noting that it has a lot of references to trading card games themselves, and to be fair, if you're not the sort of person who plays Magic or Yu-Gi-Oh! Or any of those other trading card games, you might not get much out of this. With that said though, it is worth a try if you're not into it, because it is an entirely unique experience in that it's just got so much cool stuff going for it that it's worth your effort to try anyway. With that said, I also do have like one actual complaint here. I mean, not so much actual complaint, but everything else is just incidental, right? It's just incidental to setting up a game of this type and this size, right? The length of it, the setup process, and the fact that it's just a really hard game to wrap your head around with a time limit. But admittedly, I have one problem with it that I found over the course of multiple games that I really don't like, and that is that NPCs. You need to spend a sell marker in order to get NPCs, but the thing about NPCs is that it tends to be more worth it to use all of your sell markers to get a bunch of NPCs for the victory points instead of actually selling cards, meaning that the aftermarket in a lot of the games that I played felt like it got ignored a bit more often than not in most cases. So it kind of gets to the point where you can out-earn most of the first place tournament stuff by just being good at economy. And I gotta admit, I don't like it. It's kind of gotten to the point where I'm trying to think through a way that I can pull back the amount of economic points that you might get, just because I want the tournaments to matter a little bit more. Because admittedly, it is nice to have a bit of a breath and a bit of a break after 20 minutes of non-stop trying to get your deck together, your collections together, and buying and selling cards. But at the same time, I feel like that if you're playing a card game about playing a card game, you probably want playing the card game to be the thing that gets you the most points in the end. Just saying. It's not awful, but I mean, there is this one player that we play with who just consistently manages to win via economy through a combination of sheer luck and constantly going for the economy and not really worrying too much about his tournament deck. And it can get really annoying when that happens. With that said, I still absolutely love Millennium Blades though, and it is one of my favorite board games of all time. The theme is just dead on, whether it be the fantastic art, the mechanics really feeding into the thematic side of things, or just even the flavor text being just absolutely ridiculous. Hell, there's a card in this game that says, choose a card in your binder, read out the flavor text. If no one guesses the name of the card, you get 28 points. And his name is Trivial Pursuist. It's so dumb, but I love the concept because it makes you want to read this flavor text, which is all great. But yeah, the theme is fantastic. The gameplay is fantastic. It's very simple, but underneath the surface, it's really complicated because of all the cards. All the cards just interact with each other in these really interesting ways. And the fact that you have to set up the deck from all of these multiple sets that give you a different meta every single time is an absolutely fantastic idea. And I love being able to just make a completely new game every single time and having a tournament be completely different every single time. And all of the mechanics, whether it be buying, selling, trading, making collections, or just in the tournament actually playing out your cards, interacting with the other players, all feels so good when the game goes down right. The variety from the character powers and the venues and the teams and the co-op and all of this stuff just gives more value to this package. Although again, you're going to have to buy the expansions to get a bunch of that stuff. It's all just so good at the end of the day. It is such a satisfying card game, and whenever I've got the brain power to spare, I'm more than happy to jump in and play a game of Millennium Blade on the Level 99 Games Discord and just try and wreck people, but then get wrecked. Because it is a particularly skill-based game, but at the very least I try and put up a good fight, and sometimes I actually win. And those are the most satisfying times of all. So yeah, Millennium Blades. All it really needs is a tweak to the economy rules in order to prevent economy wins being more common than tournament wins. And this game would be a 10 out of 10 for me personally. It's just so good at what it does. With that said, this has been Blue Maxima. I'll see you all next time.